let's stay with crime, much more recent crime. The past weekend, a grim death toll, 3 mass killings, 11 people killed in 2 incidents. That's in Claremont and Ndwedwe mission in Kwazulu-Natal. And then in the Eastern Cape, 6 people murdered in a home in New Brighton. Given the constraints of our police, perhaps it's time to rethink security and the role of community safety groups. I'm joined now by David Bruce, independent police researcher and consultant. David, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, absolutely horrific murders. We already have a very high murder rate. Mass murders, just even more horrific. All too common, sadly. Each case, of course, has its own underlying causes, and there are probably a lot of different causes. So it's hard to go into the specifics. But if you look at the fact that these murders are so common, what is going wrong in our society? Where are the problems and the cracks that you're seeing them?
Right. Well, I mean, there's various answers to that question, but the one issue that I have just focused on is the role of community members in contributing to local safety. And so, you know, one of the questions that's raised by what you're asking is, to what degree could, for instance, problems like murder be addressed by mobilizing community members, more effectively to address local safety problems. And so, I mean, there is quite a lot of, community involvement at the moment, which takes various forms. And I guess the key question would be, or one of the key questions would be about to what degree are any of these forms of community involvement actually contributing to the safety of community members and impacting on problems like murder.
So I think perhaps to fully understand how things might be better utilised is perhaps you can explain to us how community policing forums work, who's involved in them, how do they operate, and do they work differently in different areas of the country?
Okay, well, community police forums are basically supposed to be a type of liaison forum between the police and the community, and different people who are talking about them will emphasize different aspects of their role. So some people see them as, tend to emphasize their role as a forum for trying to ensure that police are accountable to the community. At the other end of the spectrum, some people would see them as essentially instruments of the police in trying to mobilize community support and cooperation for the work that they're doing. The key issue in some respects seems to be that the performance of community police forums seems to be quite uneven. The one thing is that you do have a phenomenon where in communities where there are more for instance, professional people with resources, community members are better able to participate in these kinds of forums. And in some of the most, high crime communities, which are often some of the poorer communities in South Africa, there's a basic obstacle to participation by people in community police forums, but then also people don't necessarily have the kind of skills and so on to try and use CPFs as an effective vehicle for enhancing the local safety.
So if we had to rethink these community policing forums to make them more effective in perhaps preventing crime, what would you suggest, particularly in those areas you've just outlined, poorer areas that they have a number of obstacles?
Well, you see, CPFs were basically established in the mid-1990s, and they're intended to serve a very specific purpose, which was related to the fact that there was deep levels of distrust in relationships between police and communities. But, and so, in many ways, they played a critical role in the 1990s. But the question is whether they should still be regarded as a kind of essential element of responses to crime in all communities in South Africa. So the one big thing is that there's been a major shift towards increasing involvement of community members in various forms of kind of patrol groups, neighborhood watches, and other types of formations of this kind. And in many ways, this could be seen to be a reflection of the fact that many people, see participation in community police forums as not achieving very much. So, there's obviously a need for a kind of more considered approach, an approach to these issues of community involvement in local safety, which is based on more of an understanding of what is actually working, what's effective, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. No one's going to waste their time with something they don't think is going to be useful. Interesting how you're explaining these community policing forums set up in the mid-1990s to deal with community distrust of police. We still have that problem today. What would you suggest as a starting point if we were to try and revamp policing forums or perhaps replace them with something else?
Well, you see, perhaps, part of the problem is here that, in some ways our assumptions that lay behind the establishment of our policing system in the 1990s were mistaken assumptions. And it's possible that part of what's wrong at the moment is that our policing system is based on kind of models of policing that are effective in the Western context, but in a developing country context where the types of resources that are available to state policing systems are not of the same order. Potentially one needs to look at different ways of structuring the policing system. And so it's not, and so potentially these various types of community policing, community patrol formations at least, are something that needs to be seen as a much more important component of our overall policing system.